hopefully this podcast will be the start of people recognizing that it is not a goddamn visual novel. Not that I've got a problem with visual novels,
Yeah.
because visual novels are great, but this derisive way of discussing anything with text boxes needs to go away.
Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Game Design Library podcast. The podcast where designers deserve to have their stories heard and designers deserve to hear those stories. On this episode, I'm speaking with Oli Clark Smith, the game director at Kaizen Game Works, who have developed and released Paradise Killer and Promise Mascot Agency. Sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hello, I'm Oli Clark Smith. I am the game director at Kaizen Game Works. We founded the company back in 2018, and I come from a background of working on kind of console AAA, AA games from back in the PS2 era all the way up to PS4, 5, and formed Kaizen with Phil Crabtree.
Yeah, we share the same last name. That's crazy.
He'd come from working in the games industry in like kind of mobile and VR, and we wanted to. We used to go to school together. We used to be in a punk band together. We used to hang out skateboarding together. So we wanted to. We'd always talked about doing something together. We made an iPhone game in 2011, and then nothing. And so when we got to 2018, I was really feeling the burn of the projects that I was being involved with, and got to the point where it's like, okay, now it's time to do our own thing, with an attitude of we might only get to do this once, so let's just do it.
Yeah.
And we made Paradise Killer and shipped that in 2020, September 2020. Some console versions followed up later, and we hired our art director Rachel to come on board for Promise Mascot Agency, which is our most recent game, which came out in April this year, 2025. Is a kind of insane blend of open world, Yakuza crime drama, and managing mascots in kind of like a big open world RPG that a small team should never have attempted to make by themselves. But here we are.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's also deck building involved in that.
I always forget that one. Yeah, I always forget that we put that in. Yeah, there's a card battler in there, kind of light card battler in there.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, like, we'll get onto Promise Mascot Agency shortly. I do want to get in depth about that, because I feel like I played Promise Mascot Agency first, and then went back to play Paradise Killer, and I mean, in terms of like sort of the tone, the attitude, it felt very like this is made by the same people. But in terms of like the actual gameplay, the gameplay loop, the game design, it felt these are two very different games. But yeah, just going back to Paradise Killer. So this was the game where you thought, okay, if we might only get to make one game, and it could be this one. What was your goal for the game? Like, what did you want to set? Was it kind of like just because obviously been maybe bogged down isn't the right word, but in this sort of mindset after working in the games industry for so long, you really just wanted to make something do you really wanted to make, you really wanted to play yourselves, or was there maybe more of a goal from the business side, or you wanted to flex certain muscles? Yeah, sort of talking about the initial genesis of the concept of Paradise Killer.
So we didn't like Paradise Killer wasn't something that we'd always kicked around as an idea. Like, one day we're going to make this game. PK was we formed Kaizen just on our savings, and we knew that we had to get something made by the end of those savings running out. And we initially started thinking about like a top-down action game. But like a twin stick shooter kind of thing. But we didn't really feel that had the juice, and we didn't really feel like it was going to be something that would set the world on fire. And so we wanted to, we changed it to being a narrative adventure game. And that came about because I had, at Supermassive, my previous job, I'd worked as one of the lead designers on Man of Medan and Until Dawn. And So I'd gone from doing some questionable quality third-person shooters in my previous jobs to then suddenly having to do a narrative game, and it was a big like gear shift, and I struggled with it for a while. But then I came out the other side of it, having I felt like I kind of went through like this mentorship with the directors, like the design directors and creative directors that we had there, and felt that I got a handle on doing that kind of like branching narrative game.
Yeah.
Because Until Dawn is like it's the beginning and the end are pretty set, but and a lot of the levels that you'll play are pretty set that you will see those levels, but what happens in those levels can vary wildly, and it's always like you go into a level and it's like a scene rather more than a level, like a drama scene, and you make choices, things happen, it branches out and diverges and then pinches back in to get you to the next story beat. And that was how we originally started doing PK, because I thought, well, I know how to do that, we'll do that, but let's set it in an open world. And we realized that that was not going to work at all. So that was when it kind of we exploded it out and turned like I love games like Danganronpa and Phoenix Wright, but the problem with those games is that they are a linear narrative that present themselves as you having agency when you don't. Because when you go into a crime scene, you cannot leave that crime scene until you have found all of the clues and done all the dialogue choices that the game designer wants you to do. And then when you go to do the trials at the end of the chapter, you cannot fail. You have to succeed in order to like jump through the hoops that the designer wants you to. And so we started thinking about, right, this top-down shooter isn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
We need to do some character-based thinking, because we know then that we feel that we can do characters, but whereas we're perhaps not ready to do top-tier action. So started making PK, and then I think coming out of previous jobs, we were pretty frustrated and angry about the amount of control we'd been able to have and the amount of ownership that we'd been able to have on games, and how when you work as part of a big AAA team, you don't get to put in yourself to the game, right? Especially on like a narrative game or like the interactive dramas of something like Until Dawn, like that. There's a lot of very good reasons why that has to be like a creative director led project,
Yeah.
and like that person's hand is on your shoulder so much of the time. But we wanted to do something that like PK was kind of concepted and designed in anger in a lot of ways. Like, okay, this is like, because at the time a lot of noise was being made about stuff like The Last of Us as being held up as like, one of the greatest games of the generation. And I'm like, are you people sniffing glue? Or it like that game, like the combat stuff, like the combat mechanics are pretty good and the level design is pretty good. And then it feels like the designers let you do all that, and then they come in and take away all your fun toys and make you watch, a cutscene.
Yeah.
And like we're saying that, what are we honestly saying that this is like the best narrative that games can do? And so we wanted to make it kind of in anger and frustration about all this stuff that's going on. Like, well, we need to make our game to be like almost like a manifesto for how we think stories should be in games. Like at like kind of one extreme, where with Paradise Killer, it's an open world detective game, and you explore the island in any order that you want. You find any clue in any order. You speak to any suspect in any order. You choose which testimony and interrogations to do in any order, and then you choose when to initiate the trials at the end. And the game never says you got it right or wrong. It just says whether you had a strong enough argument to convince the judge
Yeah.
that you were right. So you can choose how you want to do it. Like, do you want to let your friends off? Do you want to convict the guy that you really hate? And like, you get to express yourself back to the game, and then the game responds and saying, yes, that was a good argument, or no, it wasn't. So we wanted to kind of systemize all of that and just have this like kind of like explode open a game narrative and let the player get to each constituent part of the narrative in their own time, at their own pace, under their own agency, and think about it like from a like a Dark Souls kind of like way of thinking about narrative, where the world and the narrative are set. Like you're investigating a crime that has happened; it is not occurring around you,
Yeah.
and the game does not care whether you engage with the world or the story. Like we just have to stop caring about what the player does. Dark Souls does, like Breath of the Wild do. Both of those games, like just they let you loose into the world and they don't care about what you do. But whenever you do want to engage with it, the game is there to say, "All right, let's have some fun." And so that's how we wanted to do that. So that's how PK came about. Is like this kind of frustration and anger with work we'd done and how we were seeing people lord like completely linear narrative games in a medium which is all about interactivity and player expression.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? It's that ludonarrative dissonance. And it's interesting because it sounds like you're designing a game which is built to be ready to ignore the player. But at the same time, that sort of gives the player the greatest acknowledgement you could give them if they decide to engage with that. Which, obviously, I mean, it's a risk and it's not, because like the people who, if the game finds the right people who like that, then it's not a risk. If it's a boon. But then there's people which will come in and wanting that sort of Phoenix Wright style experience, and then they might not get that. But the game's the game. And was that ever a concern to you? I mean, obviously at the forefront there was like a lot of passion about almost sort of like, well, it sounds like sort of proving this point that this can be done, and it can be done by a small team as well. Was there ever a concern that maybe because of the way the game looks, because it's got that visual novel style aesthetic, that it was maybe going to appeal to, in quotes, the wrong audience? So were you always thinking, even if it does, we'll be able to convert them to this style of game?
yeah, I think one of the things that I'm really frustrated by is how the Western audience refers to anything with dialogue boxes as a visual novel,
Yeah.
because it's not. Like a visual novel, the term visual novel sprang from a very specific type of game in Japan, like machi, which are they are visual novels.
Yeah, I remember the
Play a novel
Steins
on your
one being a huge one as well.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and you are reading something on your PlayStation. What we do, because it's open world, the dialogue that you have with the characters is presented with dialogue boxes. But you know, to me, that's similar to saying, well, Metal Gear Solid is a visual novel because it
Yeah.
has codec calls in it, which is a total nonsense. And the our game fits more within like an adventure game, and a lot of games like Phoenix Wright and Danganronpa get called visual novels. They're not. They're adventure games. When you look back at stuff like the Portopia murder files or whatever it was called back on the NES, and got the Famicom Detective Club, all that kind of stuff. Like those are adventure games, and that's what we are making,
Yeah.
but in a modern way. And so the concern was people this Western approach to saying, well, anything with dialogue boxes is a visual novel, and then people being dismissive about it because it's not a performance captured cutscene. And it's really frustrating, and it haunts us with both PK and PMA, Promise Mascot Agency, because that is, I think, a really good way of delivering dialogue in games rather than cutscenes is dialogue nodes where you can button through them at your leisure. You can go back and review what's been said, and people can have fairly long characters can have fairly long conversations without having to mocap everything. But we are stuck with this term visual novel where it is not a visual novel, and like that is like something that across we have to bear because we will never ever do mocapped cutscenes at our studio. So what hopefully this podcast will be the start of people recognizing that it is not a goddamn visual novel. Not that I've got a problem with visual novels,
Yeah.
because visual novels are great, but this derisive way of discussing anything with text boxes needs to go away.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So
It is a perception issue, isn't it?
yeah,
And yeah.
but for us on PK, like we saw it as kind of being a strength in some ways, because the audience that we were courting was not, a COD player. It is not a Last of Us player. We were going after people that are into Danganronpa and Phoenix Wright, but also an audience that wants to engage with games that have kind of horror themes, because PK, it's a fantasy island. It's like vaporwavy, dead mall style aesthetic, mixed with Lovecraftian cosmic horror. And if you want to engage with kind of cosmic horror in video games, it tends to be like a combat game, or like Sinking City or something, which has a blend, but there's still a combat component. And some people just do not want that. They want the to just sit and kind of luxuriate in the world, in the story. So we were going for people that are into Danganronpa and Western narrative games, but also people that were into like kind of true crime podcasts. Like, we were hoping that we would be able to break through into that, um, because I think when you listen to like a true crime or investigative journalist podcast, you love going along with the story, but you also have this fantasy about being able to be the one that uncovers this stuff,
Yeah.
and live the role of a detective. So we wanted to see if we could break through to that. I don't know whether we did or not. I mean, it certainly didn't become the next Serial or anything like that. But it's I think there was, because it was such a niche art style. Like, it was never going to break out into the mass market, and that's fine. But I think that we got a bunch of people that would not normally be able to engage with some horror stuff, but want to, because we weren't shooting monsters and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah. And we talked a bit about potentially how PK did in terms of like critical acclaim and financial success, but before that, because you guys said you started the studio on your savings, was the entire game made with that sort of starting capital, or did you find a publisher? Did you find funding? Because I'm sure a lot of people are interested. Because I also I teach at university for game design students, and there's a lot when they, especially at the moment with the games industry, they go out into the real world and they're like, I'm not sure what to do. So how was that experience potentially gaining that funding for a brand new studio?
Yeah, we aimed to make PK in about a year, and it took two and a bit. And that was because we got funding part way through. So what we did is we got a list of publishers that we were going to pitch to, and we divided them up into like batches, so that we didn't, like, if we did one duff pitch, we hadn't then spoiled everything. So we pitched to our first round and got nothing back. And so we carried on working on the game, and we did a interview with Laura Kate Dale when she was at Kotaku, and because she was doing features on like different like regions of the UK and developers there, and I'm down in the south near Guildford, and Phil is up in the Midlands, and so we had a couple of chats about that, and then we showed her Paradise Killer, and she wrote a piece about it, and from there, the guys at Fellow Traveller saw it and approached us and said, let's see your pitch, because they have a treasure hunters fan club, I think it's called, where people from around the industry become investors, and there is then like a pot of money for Fellow Traveller to then use to fund games. And so they funded an amount of the game, which allowed us to get it through to the end and make it the game that it is. Because if we chipped it on our original deadline, it would not be the game that it is, and we would be out probably trying to work at other studios, but given the current state of things, losing our jobs at other studios. So even back then, it was difficult. It's really difficult as like an unproven studio to find an unproven studio trying to do a narrative game with a distinct art style. Is was difficult to find money for, and starting this company meant that I was living on a fraction of the money that I would have been being paid at a normal job, and thankfully my wonderful wife helped fund us through that, like covering a lot of the bills and stuff, and but it was difficult, and I think the only way we succeeded was by doing something distinct, and that catching the right person's eye.
Yeah.
And I think PMA was a similar thing where we were pitching for PMA before PK had come out and garnered its success, and it so happened to land on the right desk.
Yeah.
And Callum, one of the scouts over at Kowloon, championed it and pushed it through because it caught his eye. And I think that is, like, there's no recipe for success. Like, there's no like advice I can give to anyone other than like have taste in stuff that isn't the mainstream stuff, and then work out how to turn that into a distinct video game. Because like when we talk about having taste outside of the mainstream, that's all very well and good, but outside of the mainstream, your market diminishes, and when there's not very much money out there at the moment for people to get funding, like it's such a hard line to tread.
No, yeah, definitely, because that's the thing from like a publisher's perspective, like it's all about reducing, especially in this climate, reducing risk. And so when you've got an out there idea, like who are the finance guys? What games are the finance guys going to compare this to and get like an ROI that they can like pitch to the business and that sort of thing. But at the same time, as you described, if you guys make games where if people like it, they love it, at least in terms of how it looks initially, those first impressions, it captures them, or the like initial concept. Like I said at the start of this, when I first heard about Promise Mascot Agency, I couldn't believe that something like that existed, and that immediately made me want to play it. So yeah, there is something to be said about that, rather than maybe making the next well, at the moment it's probably going to be either Vampire Survivors or Ball Pit clones, but it was a year ago Balatro clones, But yeah, cool. So just I mean, you've talked about this like a little bit, but did you feel like both critically and financially, Paradise Killer was successful enough for you, whether it's that's personally or for the business?
Critically, Paradise Killer did very well,
Yeah.
and we were very happy with the reviews on that. Not just the reviews, but the things people said, players said about. To me, video game criticism is very important, and so it was very important to me for us to get good reviews and to generate critical conversation about it. But it was also very important for we wanted to. One of the goals was to make something. All of us here have been touched by games in a very special way and like very meaningful way, and it was trying to create something that would do that to that we could give back to the world in some ways and try and make the world a better place in some way by creating games that people love. And that response has been excellent, and it's been very affirming to see people respond well to the design choices we've made, which might be a bit divisive, and some of the story choices, and seeing people respond well to a lot of the diversity we put into our games and a lot of the inclusion and acceptance we do. And in a world that is a nightmare for people, we just wanted to be able to provide something that was an escape from that nightmare, and we seem to have succeeded in that. Financially, if we were operating on the same pay that we were when we made Paradise Killer, it would have been a success. But wanting to have an actual wage and a salary where you can build your life, it did not fund PMA. This is the problem with the indie game scene at the moment, is that games, a lot of the publishers are fairly cash poor and don't want to fund games that are in the hundreds of thousands and millions. Some do, but a lot of them don't because they haven't got the cash on hand for that, and it's a risk. And so, a lot of the games that are being funded in the indie space, from my perception anyway, is cheaper games that are, we do big 3D open worlds. We do 130 to 150,000 lines of dialogue, words of dialogue, which is, big localization effort, big effort to
Yeah.
write, big effort to build, code, everything. And every game is a big effort, but a lot of the games that are being funded are kind of ones that can be made by one or two people only. Because when we made PK, we were a two-person studio, but we worked with a bunch of contractors and freelancers to do a bunch of like art, music, stuff like that. So it's not actually a two-person team, but the funding that is out there oftentimes is for people that are living very, very cheaply, or are working on something by themselves, or have got a near complete game that a publisher can then swoop in and pick up and publish.
Yeah.
And um, and it, if you want to have a normal life, it's very difficult at the moment, and it's very scary for us looking down the barrel of having to get funding for the next project with the team size that we're at and our ambitions for what we want to do, and looking where the market is, because it seems like a lot of the market is based around the indie market is based around like the flavor of the week on Steam. You have some long term things like Balatro, Vampire Survivor, stuff like that, but a lot of them are games that are flavor of the week, and so they have this great first 1 or 2 weeks, and there's always a long tail. That's the great thing about the current market at the moment, is that games do have a tail because they are always available. Once they're on Steam, and if something goes catastrophically wrong, they are always available. So there's always opportunities to do new business with them. But and but there's so many games like that business keeps diminishing, and it's a very risky, frustrating time at the
What was the
moment.
stat? It was like 18,000 games last year, something like that, or was it 13,000 came out on Steam?
I don't know, because that kind of number is scary.
Yeah. No, it is. We'll move on to hopefully happier thoughts now. Talking about going back to so you said you were pitching Promise Mascot Agency before Paradise Killer was shipped completely. So if we can like cast our minds back to the initial conception of Promise Mascot Agency, because that must have been some kind of conception, to be able to think of the overall idea. I mean, it can be argued that at the very core fundamentality of the idea is like not been done before, but it's like, a Yakuza crime family storyline. But how did it sort of develop from there, if that was indeed the starting point?
The starting point was from Rachel, our art director, who wanted to make like a Kairosoft style 2D mascot management game, like Game Dev Story,
Oh, yeah.
Cafeteria Niponica, that kind of game. And that was her pitch: was let's make one of these all 2D, where you are managing an agency of mascots, and like the game loop was there, that there's like a calendar, and you recruit mascots in a town, and then requests come in and you send them out. So like that core loop was there, but we wanted to, because we just made an open world with PK, we wanted to carry on doing that, and we wanted to like my belief is that the core of what most people want from a video game is to control a character in 3D space, or 2D space, but generally like 3D. When you think about like all the games you want to play and all the big games that are going to be shown at Jeff Keighley's awards, they are all going to be 99% of them are going to be about a character moving in a space. And we wanted to do that and kind of blow the concept out to something bigger, so that we could try and secure the funding that we wanted for that, because we thought that would have a heart. We thought we could bring a level of success to that more easily than trying to hit it right with just a 2D thing.
Yeah.
Because getting into behind the scenes of like some game design stuff, like the smaller in scope your game is, the higher level of execution and perfection you need on each of those mechanics. If you're not confident about that, if you have a slightly bigger game, or a lot bigger game in this case, where if you're unsure about, because if you look at like business management simulation games, the gold standard is from where we were of having like almost no experience on it to the top is mega. It's huge. Like the gulf is massive. So we wanted to make something bigger where even if like we didn't quite nail the business management or the players didn't quite engage with it, there was still like the open world RPG aspect. So we wanted to do something big for that reason, and also just because we wanted to go on holiday to Japan virtually. Like we wanted to. Like, that's one of the best things about the Yakuza games is, or like something like Ghostwire Tokyo, is like the virtual tourism. So we wanted to do that, and then when I was writing up the pitch deck, we had to put in a story for it. We tend to be a gameplay first studio, but we had to put in a story. So I just said, Exiled Yakuza has to run a Mascot agency, and
that
Rachel
is such a good hook. Like I love that. Like
So yeah, Rachel wasn't thrilled about it because it sat a bit too close to Yakuza, because this was at the time when things were really popping off. The Yakuza games like Zero had come out, and I could see why, but people latched onto it, and so it stuck, and everyone came around to love what we were doing, and we made something distinct. But it's like we always want to do something different, and as soon as because there's so few series and games that deal with the Yakuza, that as soon as you say it's a Yakuza themed game, comparisons will be drawn, and like that's something we want to avoid. But I think that we got to a very distinct take on that, despite the fact that our main character is voiced by the same actor that does Kiryu's character in the Yakuza games. Like, I still think that we got to something that is, if you like those games and like the themes within those games, there's something for you in PMA, but it is a completely distinct beast.
Yeah. No, yeah, for sure. And just going back to what you were saying when you were gameplay first, I think that like you sort of hit the nail on the head with the fact that I think the 3D open world is completely integral to Promise Mascot Agency. I feel like the management is great, but I feel like it's great kind of as it is in the sort of the portion of the game that it takes up. Like I like to refer back to like the term like 30 seconds of fun. Like if the game needs to be fun within 30 seconds, or every like segment of 30 seconds needs to be fun. And I think something which was so Moorish about the game was the first of all the progression of the car, but I'd like to talk about that in a bit. But like as you're driving around, you go into objectives. There's always something to go towards, but you're constantly interrupted by the management side of the game, but in a really positive way, and it all feels like it's cohesively progressing towards sort of the same goal. And I was going to ask, what in fact, we'll stick on the design, and I'll go back to a development point in a minute. But yeah, so regarding that loop in particular, you've talked about how important it was to get right, but were you imagining this minute-to-minute gameplay sort of pretty early on of traversing through the level, going to different objectives, and having this management side of the game sort of interject itself? Was that a goal?
Yeah, we wanted to have something where again, this kind of choice about how and when to engage with the game. Like if you want to focus on exploring, then do that, and then come back and engage with it. That there ended up being a bit of tension between those goals, with that goal and our fail state later on. Like we got 2 or 3 years into dev not knowing what our fail state would be, and if you don't have a fail state in a simulation game, you've not got a lot, because then like what's the point of doing anything? And then we put in our fail state where you need to send money back home. You've been exiled by your boss. She Matriarch Shimazu fakes your death and exiles you so that you can work in secret to repay the fortune that you lost. and she needs money to keep the Yakuza families above her off her back, and we ended up balancing that too hard for some players. Because the game is somewhat freeform, you can unlock that fail state within the first couple of hours or after 10 hours, depending how you play the game. And then depending on what you've done within those hours, you might find that fail state extremely hard or extremely easy. So we ended up having some tension there that I didn't want, but I still think for the majority of people it worked quite well, of having an open world that you drive around and NPCs to speak to, quests to do, and then the management simulation is constantly running in the background, and you engage with it as and when you want to. But the other thing about that is that everything you do in the world feeds into the management simulation. So when you help out someone with a side quest, they unlock as a hero card, which will help you when a mascot gets into trouble. When we send them out on a job, they get into trouble. You play a card game where a mascot is stuck in a door, and you need to play hero cards to give them enough power to get them out of the door. And so that feeds into. So you do some side quest. You upgrade your hero card. Well, that's made the simulation easier in some regards. It's fed into the simulation. You do other stuff in the game. You speak to other NPCs, and like the town that you're in is dying. It's been bled dry by a corrupt mayor, and so you invest money that you make from sending mascots out to do jobs to improve and open up new businesses within the town. And those businesses are locations in the 3D world that you can drive up to and explore and see change as you unlock them, as you improve the town, and then that's a. You've got send a mascot out on a job that generates money, which then allows you to improve the town, which then gives you more job opportunities for mascots and makes more NPCs available to speak to, so you can get hero cards. And so both of those things are then feeding back into the simulation, and then there's lots of collectibles in the game. They all feed back into the simulation, and so that was always the goal of having this like meta game. Like the simulation is always running, like something like, I've played an awful lot of Metal Gear Solid 5, and everything you do in that game feeds back into the kind of meta base building aspect of that game. So I always wanted there's like this constant churn going on, because we operate on a day-night cycle, and like mascot jobs take X amount of time, mascots need X amount of rest, and so there's this constant feeling of I run a company, and so there is a day-to-day churn of running that company, and so we wanted to give that feeling of you constantly have to. You can choose not to engage with it, but eventually it's going to come back, and you do have to do something with it.
Yeah, for me, I completely see your point in terms of it maybe being like a sort of an element of the balancing of the game that you can't completely control, and so therefore it creates risk for the player experience in terms of the fail state. For me, it works really, really well in terms of creating that tension, and I think it was sort of, for me anyway, it balanced incredibly well in that it felt like I was just making payments at the beginning, and then slowly it started to loosen up as I started to unlock more buildings, because one of the things as well is that you don't just get access to new jobs, but those jobs are more that are higher paying as well, and at that point your mascots are better as well, so less chance of them getting into trouble, and you can how many mascots is it, 18 or 20 you can send out, and so you can have 20 out at once. And and then you could do that. We unlock, there's side businesses as well, where there's like a merchandise business, and there's subcontractor mascots in different towns. I completely forgot about the claw minigame.
And so there's lots of ways to make money in the game, so long as you engage with the game, and that's what we wanted to do. Is we don't just want to serve everything up on a plate. You need to go out and discover and engage, and when a character says, hey, maybe we should talk about this, maybe you should, because then there's something to do. And we do quest log and objective marker quite a lot, but there's also a load of stuff that you can it's just up to you how you engage with the game and how do you want to spend your time. And we never do drive into an area and a cutscene triggers which advances the story. You always have to press X on a character to advance the story, except one time, before someone pedantic calls me out on it, except one time in the intro where we had to do that, but when you're out in the open world, you choose what to engage with when. So you are playing the game how you want, even though the story is way more linear than Paradise Killer. It's still about. I think the best kind of like open world games, RPG games, are like the Yakuzas or the Monster Hunters, where you've got your near term, medium term, long term goals, and you're choosing which order to do them in, and how to
Yeah.
engage with it, and how to work your way through it.
And it's great as well because all those goals, the short and medium term goals, feed into that long term goal as well. So it never feels like the
Yeah.
players are sort of missing out on anything, which is great. Sort of to get into a bit of the weeds, because one of my what I'd like to think is more of a specialization for me as a designer is in terms of like balancing games, balancing economies, about balancing resources and that sort of thing. There's a lot going on. It's sort of behind the scenes, constantly churning with money generation and that sort of thing. Did you guys use any sort of methodology or any particular almost tactic to get this balancing right, or was it more so feel and user tests and iteration?
Uh, it was feel. I didn't want it to be, but it was feel because so a lot of the things that didn't go so great on this game is because when we signed it, we said it was going to be a 2-year project, and it turned into 4.5. So what that meant is that we were always working towards a milestone, a deadline that kept moving,
Yeah.
and so we'd have to make choices based on like what just needs to get done.
Yeah.
And then we'd find out that no matter how many of those choices we make, it would not get done. And we so we ended up never like sitting back and properly specking like the tools and the methods for dealing with this. And this is like a 20-hour game, and we are a fairly small team, and we're releasing simultaneously on PC and consoles. And so like the testing weight is massive, um and everyone that was testing it, we got some really good user feedback. We did a couple of rounds of user feedback early on, got some really good guidance from players on that. But then it came down to just a lot of like feel, and I think we got it right for a good number of people, but we didn't get it right for a not insignificant number of people. And there's a load of lessons to be learned from there, because really getting into the weeds, the way that we made it is in Unreal, and that involves a lot of like data assets that are all separate. So let's say there's 20 mascots. If you want to compare the stats, like the starting stats and cost of recruiting all of these mascots, you have to open up 20 individual files and compare them. What would have been really nice would have been to have a new bit of UI in an Unreal where it just gives me a list, like it creates a spreadsheet of all these mascots for me. Same with like the job locations. There's like, God knows, like 30 of those or something. And in order to balance them, I started off with a spreadsheet where I could a hand edited spreadsheet where I could, do those values and then copy and paste them into the data assets in Unreal. But then at some point, no matter how good you think you are, how diligent you think you are, you will make a change on the fly in Unreal, and then that spreadsheet is out of date if you don't then go and update it. And of course, when you're running against a deadline that is constantly changing, you won't keep that documentation up to date. So for our next game, like when we get into it properly, I'm hoping that we will have instead of all these individual data assets, we will be able to like have at a glance a snapshot of the economy. And like if we were to make another PMA, we're not, but if we were, we would have it so that we would have some way of running the game and taking snapshots of it without having to run the game, you know what I mean? Like simulate it somehow in Unreal, and like invest the time in those tools to be able to do it. And we totally underestimated like how difficult that was going to be. And you hear some stories of like, one of the most well-balanced games is Ridiculous Fishing that Vlambeer did, and that was all just done by feel, by one of the most talented by field designers out there, but we are not all that good, and we need tools for that. But we just didn't have the time, or realize we had the time to invest in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I feel like it felt pretty great to me, but yeah, I mean, there's always going to be that element, regardless of how well you balance it and how well you design it, unless it's dynamic, which might take some of the sort of the juice out of the experience of, like, especially when doing that fail state.
Yeah, because one of the things we wanted to get to is that when you start this thing, this is the last resort for this Yakuza family. This is their last business. It's bankrupt. Yeah. You're in a dying town. There is a curse hanging over you. Like, this is not going to be easy. And so we had to make the start of the game feel like that. Otherwise, we are not living up to the fantasy that we're promising. And so for some people, I know that was a bit of like bit of friction that they didn't want, where they expected, something like a Kaizen game. Is the onboarding is very frictionless. It's very easy to just sit down and play, whereas we needed you to feel like you are turning around the fortunes of a bankrupt business, and you've got nothing. Like, for the first couple of years, we started you out with an amount of money, like 10,000, 100,000 yen in your wallet. And then we were like, no, this doesn't make any sense at all. We need to start you with zero to really show that you have got nothing and that you need to work for everything. And I think for a lot of people the balancing worked out, but for some people it did not.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. So one other thing I want to we talked a bit about the risk of having, essentially, the risk of player agency. There's one other aspect which it was the only thing which I observed amongst my sort of peer group, because I got them all to play Promise Mascot Agency as well, is one of the biggest differences in player experience seem to stem from the way that the car upgrade progression, where the truck upgrade progression works. Because I assumed that regardless of what, it's like a fox spirit that is, you run over, you would get the same...
It's a spirit fox.
Yeah.
It's not an actual... We're not asking you to go out and roadkill foxes. Some spirit foxes have stolen the blueprint of the inventor mechanic that wants to do crazy upgrades to your truck.
Yeah, but yeah, regardless of which one you get these blueprints from, I would have thought they would have been sort of the same linear progression of unlocks. But I remember the second upgrade I got was the ability to fly, and I feel like that did significantly improve the experience for me of the 30 seconds of fun, the minute-to-minute gameplay. And on the other end of the spectrum, because I had 3 other people play the game, there was someone who never got the flying ability, and so their experience felt a bit less positive about that experience. So was that something which you were aware could be a possibility going in, or?
Yeah, and I think that's just live by the sword, die by the sword kind of game design, which I think is important. There's a bunch of stuff in here, and if you find it, wonderful. If you don't, well, and you have a great experience, that's great. But if you have a bad experience, that's just part of the risk of how we design stuff. And to talk about the Yakuza games again, the most recent one, Yakuza Pirate in Hawaii, what they've done is those games are full of, there's the main quest, and then there's all the side activities like the mini games, and they used to just let you stumble into those mini games and have fun with them. But now what they do is, on the main quest, they make it an objective to go and engage with it, because God forbid you should miss anything in that game. And that to me feels really like shallow. Like, it's so obvious what they're doing, and it's just taken the joy of discovery out.
Yeah.
So for us, we're always going to do, like, we're swinging harder the other way now on our next game in terms of discovery. And if players engage, fine. If they don't, fine.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, that's exciting to hear. And I will ask a straightforward question about that right at the end, as I'm sure you're aware. But you've talked a bunch about the different aspects of this next question, which is just around sort of what the main core fundamental differences there were between the initial, like, first prototype you had Unreal, like the first build that you played around with, and then the GMC that would then be shipped. I mean, there's obviously 5 years of difference here. I'm sure there were some things which were fundamentally sort of, I mean, like the management aspect of the game. Obviously, there were probably tweaks there, but it was like it was still a management side of the game. What would you say was the main core differences, and why were they made? And then also, are there any sort of like of the biggest concessions which you had to make just due to the nature of development that you wish maybe you didn't have to make?
So the way we pitched this game is that we signed a deal to fund the game, but only if we passed a green light meeting after a funded 6-month prototype period. So we did that, and that 6-month prototype period, the shape of the game that we have now at the end is at a high level really similar. Like nothing really radically changed. Like a lot of detail changed, like where we unlock stuff and who pops up where and this, that, and the other. But the management simulation was torn apart and rebuilt at least 3 or 4 times during development, but you would not know it as the player. Like it was, the shape of it remained the same, but how it worked needed to be changed. And the best way to do that was to do a version of it and go, okay, like some of this is feeling okay, but a lot of it isn't workable. Let's pull it apart and put it back together. The thing that was most obvious in our first iteration is that we had a calendar system. Like part of the UI was a month by month calendar, and you would plot on this day, Tofu is going out to this job. On Tuesday, Chororo is going out to this job. And that wasn't fun at all. Like managing your own calendar is not fun. There's no amount of video game that you're going to put on that is suddenly going to make
it sounds
managing
like
your schedule fun.
It sounds like it was sort of like front loading that management into like one big chunk. That's how it sounds. It sounds like, rather than it being like interjectors.
Yeah, it's to try and give you this sense of like managing people, but that wasn't at all fun. The biggest difference is really the original version of when a mascot gets in trouble. So you send a mascot out on a job and then they get in trouble, get stuck in a door, set fire to a kitchen, whatever. What we did was you would unlock heroes, and then you would send them out. When a mascot got in trouble, you'd send them to the job, and then they'd have a percentage chance of succeeding in getting the mascot out of trouble, and then you would buff that percentage chance by giving them items to take with them. And then there'd be a whole 3D cutscene where the hero would drop in and give the mascot a item, and then the mascot would say, "Hooray, I managed to get out of the door." That was like a huge production nightmare in terms of generating all of those 3D cutscenes in all of our different job locations with all of the different heroes. And the gameplay was no fun at all, because it was just select a menu, watch a cutscene, and that's not fun at all. So that got redesigned a couple of times before we just binned it off completely and turned it into this card battler game where you build up this deck of hero cards, and each we call them obstacles when a mascot gets in trouble. Each obstacle has a type and a health value, and you are trying to play hero cards that match the type to deal damage to it, but then also grant you extra abilities like draw extra cards or get extra actions. And it's not the deepest card battler. You know, you're not getting Balatro, you're not getting Inscription out of this, but it's like supposed to be like that friction that you want of like a quick JRPG style battle, like in an open world. So that was the biggest thing that changed. But then there was just a lot of refinement, and there wasn't anything that we lost, like concessions that we had to make, other than, was there anything? There was. I think we got very fortunate in that we got to put in almost everything that we wanted, and anything that didn't get to go in was small little story beats, like side quest story beats. I know there was some stuff that Rachel was very keen to get in, but we just ran out of time because this game was so big that like small side story beats, and most of those would have required like some extra 3D asset to or 2D asset to really show off. And they just became less and less important the closer we got to ship. And so it's very fortunate that the people funding us, Kowloon, liked what we were doing and kept saying yes whenever we wanted more time, because they could see the promise of what was there, but it just needed more time and money. And um, it allowed us once again to feel like we got away with something by getting someone to give us money to put everything that we wanted into a video game.
Yeah, by making something which the people who were giving you the money really enjoyed. No, that, I mean, that is, I mean, you hear about games like taking like a lot longer than they initially set out, but I think that's probably the longest extension of like an initial. I assume like the initial contract was that like 2 years. And so like the milestones were set out, so it would have been like a business decision every single time and so that's a lot of people to convince.
And thankfully, like, the people in charge at Kowloon liked the concept of the game and like working with us, and we are, out of the games that Kepler produced, we are like one of the cheapest. Like, when you look at what they produced with like Expedition and Rematch and stuff like that, like we are a very small team producing something that costs a lot less, so it's easier to go and say like, can we have this extra money? And our contract had to change with them, so like the rev share has to change with that when they give us more money, like, and that is fine by us. So it all worked out.
Yeah, that's cool. No, that's great to hear. You don't get very many positive stories in the games industry anymore. No. So that is a good one. We talked about mascots a lot, and I feel like we haven't talked about. Well, we talked about mascots a bit. I don't think we talked about them enough. So first one, which I want to ask, which if any of the your fans are listening to this will want to know, is firstly, who came up with Pinky, and what I think is, did they realise they peaked as kind of a person, and it's all downhill from here.
So when we started working on this game, we're a bunch of Westerners. We were very aware that we needed to have like someone from Japan to work with us quite closely, and we got the opportunity very early on to work with Akumi Nakamura and her concept artist Mai Matari to establish some of the characters and look and feel of the game. And we asked for an assistant character that was a mascot who was kind of like a ball of chaotic anger and energy. And Ikumi and Mai came back with Pinky because it worked with this concept of like Michi, the main character, cuts off his finger as atonement for messing up at the start of the game. And then he meets severed finger Mascot when he gets to this new town to start his new life, and that we got that back as part of the art bible from Ikumi, and we were really into it. And then Rachel kind of developed this whole feel about promises and Pinky Promise, and these two coming together, and some of Pinky's backstory about, Michi and Pinky both come from society. Like, Michi lives outside of the law, but before he got into the Yakuza, he didn't have a family. He made a lot of poor choices. Pinky similarly was abandoned by her family and has suffered from a lot of rejection and a lot of failure in life, and is ready to make take any opportunity and make a go of it. And so they form this kind of like unlikely team, and Rachel really drove that forward. And then I do most of the writing on the game, and so then I brought that kind of her humor, like Pinky's humor, which is so much fun to write. And so it's this group effort of so much of our games, like they have this quite singular like aesthetic vision or feel, but so much of that is like we just work with a bunch of really cool people. We trust them and allow people to put their own experiences and their own cultural input and lived experiences into the game, and then we bring it all together, right? So like no one sat down and said, this is Pinky, she looks like this, she behaves like this, her writing is like this is a history. Like a bunch of different people came together to make something that it's when we finished PK, I was fine to let all my children on Paradise Island go at the end of development. Of like they've done their work. It's time to say goodbye to them. But at the end of this, like it's so hard to say goodbye to Pinky because she's such a fun character to hang out with in the game, and for me, like to write, she's such a fun character to write. And then when you play, really fun to hang out with. And then the voice acting job that Ayana Shibuya did is incredible.
Yeah.
Like the range that she brought to Pinky, because Pinky swings like she's almost bipolar in terms of her like swinging between very big highs and very low lows. And her reactions to stuff will change from line to line. So as an actress, Ayana was having to switch between, wildly ecstatic to very morose or very angry line to line, and she just did an excellent job. And it was hard to be like, right, we're done with Pinky now. We're gonna stop writing Pinky.
The bond was there from the beginning. Like you set out like that they both were coming from not the same place, but like sort of synergistic places in life. When as soon as they met, like they were kind of stuck together, and that was really great. But I just wanted to bring it back to one thing that you mentioned, because right at the start of this, you were saying like one of the things that you were frustrated about was the fact that there was that person's hand always on your shoulder, like for example working on Until Dawn. There's a singular vision from a singular person, and it feels like the work you've done with Paradise Killer and Promised Mascot Agency is create this sort of like I don't think symbiotic's the right word, but they're like a situation and a culture and the way you develop games where everyone is so invested and on board with that vision that you're all the vision holders and you all have that agency.
Yeah.
And there's that trust there, which is kind of like you've executed the mission which you set out to do like 5 years ago at this point.
Yeah, like so like my job title is game director, Rachel's is art director, but the way that we explain it is more like we are judges that sit, and then people come to us and say like, we think that this should go in the game, or I would like to do this with this character. We go, yes, that can go in the game, and here's how we're going to integrate it and make it work. Or no, that can't go in the game, and here's why. It's not just down to, sometimes it is down to personal taste, but it's not just some arbitrary reason. It's like, because of this, this, and this thing that you are talking about doing just won't work, or won't fit in. But that is very rare that happens. And that's why we like working in fantasy worlds, where we are able to take anything that any of the people working on the game bring to us, and work out how to integrate it. And that is why we don't voice act every line in our game, because if someone has an idea late on, we can just write a new line to cover the inclusion of it in the world, and to explain it away. And that really helps.
Yeah, I mean, like the amount of times I've worked on a project, and it's sort of like as soon as voice acting is introduced, it's like almost all of a sudden development becomes like you're going through cement. Like you're like wet cement, like trying to move stuff becomes so difficult and so expensive. So that's definitely like, that makes sense. Do you ever sort of sit back and like sort of be like, I've done it, I've done what I set out to do, or like do you feel satisfied with the culture that you've created in the studio?
Yeah, I think so. I'm very happy with where the studio is and the people that we currently work with and what they bring to the project. And games are always a team effort, and we never wanted to create a company where we are doing it, we're doing our thing and our thing only. It's what we want is to have an opportunity to put ourselves into a game, but then let other people do that as well, and work with cool people that we trust to do that. And we're winding up, like gearing up for the next project and working out kind of the shape of that. And again, like people that we're working with, we're going to them saying like, here's kind of like the rough shape of what we want to do, and we would like to work with you again. What do you want to bring to that? And let them get in with like enthusiastically to kind of like explore the space there and be like, well, what can you do, and how can we either integrate it as is or adapt it adapt what we bring into it, or adapt what you're bringing to it. And yeah, I'm very happy with how the company works at the moment. It's, you know, from a company position, we are in a strange spot where we make these kind of cult hit games,
Yeah.
and uh, it's that's a very like difficult position to be in some ways with how bad the games industry is at the moment, because we're not doing Vampire Survivor numbers, and everyone wants a lot of Vampire Survivor numbers. So it's
Yeah.
you know, we I don't know how long this will keep going, how long we can weather the storm of getting by convincing people to give us money based on the strength of how much they like us, rather than like how much they like our games, rather than what a potentially like runaway business success it could be.
Yeah.
We'll see, but um, we'll keep taking it while we can.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that must help is because we know that Promise Mascot Agency did better financially and like on a similar level of critical acclaim to Paradise Killer. But what's more important than the financial success, from what I can see as an outsider, looking on social media, I follow you guys on Blue Sky, and on forums, the Steam community, is that your community around your studio is so passionate and they want to support, and that feels like it's harder and harder for indie developers to be able to get that sort of core foundation. So do you feel like, I mean, I don't know, like that is a factor in either your guys' decision making, or even if it's like is part of like a publisher's decision making, because if it feels like that's sort of rarer and rarer nowadays that indie developers have that foundation. It feels like you guys have got anyway.
Yeah, our community is awesome, and I think that our games are like Promise Mascot Agency is a game about positivity and about bettering the world around us in a time when the world is dying and is being made actively worse by everyone in charge, with absolutely no justice for those people. And so I think it attracts people that play it, kind of latch onto that and enjoy that. And there is a message of positivity in it without it being like cloyingly wholesome.
Yeah.
It's we never like punch down. We always punch up with our humor. And we are, I say, Phil and I used to be in a punk band, so we come from this kind of like anti-capitalist, anti-authoritarian mindset where the people above us are the ones ruining our lives, and let's punch up at them. And I think it that resonates pretty well with people. But also, our community are cool because they're not psychos like you get with some communities. Like when you
Yeah.
look at how the community engages with like the Call of Duty social media managers and community managers, like that, I would never want that job of having to deal with those kind of like
I can
feral
imagine
children.
it. Yeah.
And our community has always been wildly supportive of us because we try to be supportive of people through the messages in our games. And whenever they, I can count on one hand the number of weird messages that we've got that I don't want to see, and that is such a small number compared to how the community at large has responded. And like Rachel, our art director, she runs the community stuff, and she is like she helps with our like narrative and writing in the game. I tend to be a bit more to the extreme end, and then she really helps balance it down to the point where it is we tone down some of the anger, and we get something that's a bit more calmer, and which you wouldn't expect considering some of the stuff we do in PMA. But she takes that kind of like empathy and really like genuine like charm and niceness to our community as well.
Yeah.
And I think like she does such a great job of talking to those people, and like we don't have the largest community in the world, but I wouldn't want another one,
No.
like
Yeah.
it's like they're cool. And we've got some people that we speak to regularly, and we try to be active on the Steam forums and stuff like that. And I think it's I think that going back to, am I happy with where we're at? Yes, like we've made some cool games. We've done a couple of them, and they've resonated with people, and people have responded by not being psychotic. So all good.
No, that is good. I mean, like, if from an outsider looking in, if they just saw screenshots of the game, they probably guess a very different outcome for the community. But like, yeah,
Yeah.
from what you said, it makes complete sense. Like, people, I feel like, even whether it's consciously or subconsciously, really feel these positive messages, and the people who it resonates with the most are the people which enjoy the game the most, which are the people that interact with you outside of the game the most. So that all makes sense. This is just the last question, really, which is, you sort of teased it a little bit like throughout this, and I'm not looking for any sort of scoop or anything like that. So you're starting to work on the next game, and I'm not necessarily asking for anything in detail, but more so, what is the goal of your next game personally, either as developers, as people? Like, you've talked about wanting to maybe improve the balancing aspects of it via the tooling which you're going to create inside Unreal. Is there anything else that you can think of?
This is a style of game, not this exact game. This is a style of game that Phil and I have wanted to make for decades. We talked about it when we were teenagers, and some people, if they know me, I don't post on social media anymore, but if they've stuck around from before when I used to, they might get a sense of the kind of thing that we are approaching. It is a very different genre to what we have done before. When we've spoken to, we've had some business meetings about this, and people are like, you guys, because I think what people want is to be surprised, and they want novelty, and that's why indie games are so great, because whenever you go on Steam, there's a billion different things that like surprise you and delight you. And so like business wise, it's something of a poor decision to not iterate on what we've done before. But I don't think people want sequels a lot of the time. Like with indie game stuff, obviously like Silk Song and Hades 2 have done silly numbers, but I think generally they're the exception, and people want to be delighted and have novelty. So we're doing something very, very different, and working out how Kaizen does that. And I think I'm coming back to this game. Like I said it earlier on, like with Paradise Killer, we had this kind of like manifesto of how we think story interaction should work in games rather than storytelling.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that kind of manifesto for PMA because we kind of got it out of our systems. But looking back, I think that was a really good way of driving forward the vision for PK. And so I think we're getting back to a bit of that with the next game, and taking something that is an established genre and then saying, no, this is how we think it should be done. And not to be like a definitive statement on it, but like, this is our take on it, and this is, there's some things that are being done at the moment in games that we do not agree with, and that we want to put our spin on, and but still have in what people like about our games. Like, we always wanted to have like the Kaizen house style, rather than, and that doesn't refer to art style, it refers to like the overall package. Like when you come to one of like Grasshopper, like when you go to a Grasshopper game, whether it's No More Heroes or whether it's Contact or whether it's whatever it might be. I'm trying to think of a more recent one that they did, like Let It Die or something. Like you get that feeling, you get that vibe from them, and that's what we want to do. So we are, despite going between different genres, trying to do that, and bring people along, like, because it's a very different genre. Some of our fans might be put off by the kind of thing that we're doing, so we are actively designing to make sure that there is something from those people. And we're a huge believer in accessibility, and we put a lot of accessibility options into our games, and we will be porting all of those over and adding more so that people can have the experience that they want to with our game. Like, I think it's great that some games like a Dark Souls, I love Dark Souls, and because it is a set experience in terms of like, is it not a set experience? It's a set vision of like, some people said this is how difficult this game should be.
Yeah.
This is how much you need to engage with the game to get through it. I want us to make a game that has a similar style to that, like a similar vision to that of like, this is the game we want to make, but allow people to tune it so that people can just enjoy it.
Yeah.
And just get what they want out of it, because games used to be this thing of like, here it is, engage with it or don't. And now I think we're much more interested in making sure that as many people as possible can choose to engage with it. Not that we make something that's low friction, that is uninteresting because we've made it so bland and frictionless, like certain other games, but something that draws people in, but allows them to just tweak the things that they need to give themselves an enjoyable experience, or something that they need for accessibility reasons.
Yeah, especially in the indie space, it feels like the audience is savvy enough to make those changes, those adjustments. I mean, some games go like maybe too far in that they can change every single slider for every single set of like stat in the game, and that could, there is always the sort of argument of like needing to protect the player from themselves. What's the other one in terms of like, I can't think of the right word now. Optimizing the fun out of the experience.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it obviously, if it's balanced correctly in the indie space, it feels like, if people want to experience the game for how it is, for better or for worse, like that type of audience, like the Dark Souls audience. I've got the headline, by the way. The next game is Promise Mascot Agency X Dark Souls. Then they can do that. But yeah, for people who want to, like, occasionally, I'm not saying I've ever done this, but like on Celeste, turning on the assist mode so I can't die if I'm like about to throw my Steam Deck at the wall.
What do you want to do? Do you want to carry on playing a game that you like, or do you want to stop playing it?
Yeah.
And like that's exactly fine. Like, if we were to make a shooter next, then like we will put in a god mode and we will put in a one-hit kill option in the settings that you don't have to unlock. It's just there because our games are like more than the sum of their parts in some ways, because we throw so much stuff in there that there will be people that only want to engage with that narrative, and we think that our characters on our narrative are worth it by themselves. And so if you don't want to engage with the shooting stuff, if we make it, or combat, whatever kind of game we're making, like, you will be able to engage with the parts that you want. And I think for some people that sounds off-putting, like, oh, well, you're just making a game that's nothing. And no, we're not. Like, goddamn Control, one of the best games I've ever played. That Definitely. Just in the options menu, just turn on God mode, turn on one hit kill. Like, if you want to do that, because that has such a good fiction and lore and sense of exploration about it.
Yeah.
Like, combat is just one part of that game. But like, if you played God Hand and turned on invincibility in God Hand, that game is only combat, and you would have nothing. But because like games are so big and offer so many different things, like, because I don't like some modern games because of the way they control, and I think modern games, like modern AAA games, control horrendously. So like in those cases, like, they've still got lore and fiction that are worth exploring, and exploration. I'm such a big sucker for exploration that I still want to just like bathe in those worlds. And so that game is still there. Like the design, the intended game is still there, but for me, I get to go through it.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, first of all, a correct opinion on Control, definitely. I think that makes sense. Like, narrative, I think, is sometimes sort of often overlooked. Like, there can just be this attitude, I think, especially for maybe people with less experience. The game feel needs to be the game feel needs to be perfect. Like, that's the main thing, and everything else can go out the window. But I mean, on the other hand, we were talking about Last of Us, but like the sort of the sad dad era of PlayStation games, those are, regardless of how they felt to play, the story is what got them through it. you know, and I think there needs to be that balance there. You need to have the narrative chops for a lot of this. I mean, like I mentioned Celeste very briefly as well, but Celeste, I don't know how many lines of dialogue there were in that game, not many, but that was one of the best stories that I played in, I think it was 2014 when I played that.
That's one of those games that I get very jealous of, because they managed to do something that I don't see myself being able to do, you know, with their economy of storytelling. I just like writing, so I write too much, and like they it's Maddie, isn't it, that made that? Like she's so good at like such wonderful feeling platforming, but also such economy and impact of storytelling that, like, well, you're a better designer than me.
Every line, every screen, it felt so economical. Everything felt deserved. Every pixel felt deserved to be on that screen. So but yeah, honestly, that's all the questions I have. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about Get Off? There's sometimes when I listen to podcasts and I feel like, the guest wasn't done speaking there. He could tell they wanted to say more.
I always talk too much. So I feel like I know that I've you ask a simple question, and again, zero conciseness, and my mouth just keeps going. So I'm happy to talk about anything and could keep talking about our games for ages. But I think I didn't come in with anything that I wanted to get off my chest. So cool. I had my rant about The Last of Us. So that's tick that one off the Oli bingo card.
Cool. Well, you know what? We'll leave it there then. So thank you for being on. Thank you
very much for having me and asking me.
No worries. All right. And there we are, that's episode 1 of the GDL Pod in the books. Thank you once again to Oli for joining me. When I sent out an email to Kaizen, I wasn't sure if I'd even get a response, given this is a brand new thing. But to actually take a chance on a brand new podcast is a testament to how much Oli and the studio want to give back to the industry, which is great. Tune in 2 weeks for episode 2, and keep an eye on the community tab on the channel to find out who the next guest will be. Thanks for listening, and keep on keeping on.